Everyone. Welcome to tonight's program for the Henry David Thoreau Prize for Literary Excellence in Nature Writing. If you weren't planning on coming to that, I invite you to stay anyway because it's going to be real great. It's been a beautiful day here in Concord, and I can't think of a better way to honor a day like this than by awarding a prize to someone who can not only recognize the magnificence of nature, but also share that magnificence through writing. I'm Rebecca Migdal, Executive Director of the Thoreau Society, and I'm glad to be here tonight as Drew Lanham receives the Thoreau Prize, and I'm so honored to serve this organization. The Thoreau Society is an incredible community. I want to thank the phenomenal staff whose hard work and knowledge breathe life into our mission every day. They make our programs and outreach consistently possible and often exceptional. To the Thoreau Society board members, a dedicated group of volunteers who guide the Society with insight and vision, thank you for your wisdom and support. And to all of our community members, contributors, collaborators, community partners, and friends, we are profoundly grateful. Each of you helps us cultivate a space for deeper exploration, for meaningful discussion, and for shared reverence for nature and what's possible in our world. Tonight, as we gather in Concord, it's wonderful to see familiar and new faces in the room and online. Thank you for being part of this community, no matter where you are in the world. It's heartening to know that so many share a commitment to Thoreau's life, work, and legacy, and want to celebrate the power and importance of nature writing. So with that, I'll invite up Thoreau Society President John Cusick to start our proceedings.
Good evening. My name again is John Cusick. I'm the president of the Thoreau Society, and on behalf of our group, I'm delighted to welcome you to the awarding of the 2024 Henry David Thoreau Prize for Literary Excellence in Nature Writing. Tonight, we celebrate one writer's remarkable achievement in this field. But before we begin, it's important to remind ourselves that understanding and caring for the natural world, our shared home, is a collaborative effort that unfolds over many generations. When we speak a word for nature, sometimes in the precise language of science, sometimes in lyrical English, we add our voices to other people who have spoken in other tongues in other times, as they've learned to sing the songs of their own homelands. As we begin our celebration of the very best in nature writing tonight, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the territory of the Mesquitequid people, a community within the Massachusetts nation and the broader Wampanoag world, who built their lives at this juncture of three rivers, a home place full of rich meadows and thick forests. They caught fish and gathered mussels in the waters, planted corn, beans, and squash in the great fields, hunted deer in the woods, and sought to live in harmony with their many human and non-human neighbors. They welcomed the first English settlers and sought to live alongside them, gathering in nearby Neshoba and taking up Christianity until they were caught up in the brutal violence of King Philip's War. In 1675, they were dragged from their refuge at what is now Orchard House and confined on Deer Island in Boston Harbor, an exile from which few returned, and not for long. Thoreau believed they had all vanished, and in Natural History of Massachusetts, his first sustained effort in nature writing, he saw them transfigured into the form of a familiar bird. I have seen it suggested somewhere, he writes, that the crow was brought to this country by the white man, but I should soon as believe that the white man has planted these pines and hemlocks. He is no spaniel to follow our footsteps, but rather flits about the clearings like the dusky spirit of the Indian, reminding me oftener of Philip and Powhatan than of Winthrop and Smith. He is a relic of the dark ages. The crow is for Thoreau at once an iconic inhabitant of the Concord landscape and a reminder of the cruel history that brought him to these woods and waters. And if he thought mistakenly that the land's original people had gone, we celebrate the fact that their descendants continued to gather, and we thank them for their long stewardship of this place that we too are learning to love. The Thoreau Society is old for an author society, the oldest and largest in the United States. The Thoreau Prize is more new, but has quickly become a keystone in our work to keep Thoreau's writings and ideas alive around the globe and across generations. Dale Peterson started the prize in 2010. He began working with the Thoreau Society in 2017, with the full administration passing into our hands in 2019. During these past 14 years, we've been privileged to honor a slate of writers who have ably followed Thoreau in speaking a word, many words, for nature. Writers like Greta Ehrlich, E.O. Wilson, Linda Hogan, Cy Montgomery, Mary Oliver, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Jane Goodall, and Terry Tempest Williams. Writers who have helped us see our beautiful and troubled world in stunning, miraculous detail, and who have mapped and modeled the many ways we can fight to save it. We are proud to announce that the prize is now fully endowed, thanks to one major anonymous donor who provided a 2-to-1 match for the host of other contributors who added their share. Together, we are now able to better foster the ongoing legacy of Thoreau's work, the long task of using the written word to build a more just relationship with all of our neighbors. Thanks to everyone who took part in this effort to build a lasting forum for honoring the very best nature writers at a time when their words and wisdom are so desperately needed. We are grateful for the Trinitarian Congregational Church for hosting this event in such a beautiful and storied place. Tricon claims several members of the Thoreau family as charter members, though not, of course, Henry himself, who is loath to join any organization. Thanks as well to the staff of the Thoreau Society who have sweated the details that make this process work, especially Corinne Smith and Richard Picoretto and Rebecca Migdal. And thanks in particular to the Thoreau Prize Committee, a truly inspiring group of writers, editors, and scholars who discuss with inspiring passion and care the many wonderful candidates for this prize. This year they have chosen well indeed. And it's my pleasure to introduce the chair of the Thoreau Prize Committee and past president of the Thoreau Society, Rochelle Johnson, who will introduce our 2024 Thoreau Prize recipient.
Good evening. It's my great honor to say a few words about Dr. Joseph Drew Lanham. Dr. Lanham once wrote of his home place, "There are still priceless places where nature hangs on by tooth, talon, and tendril." Like Henry David Thoreau, Dr. Lanham devotes himself to exploring such places and celebrating them in words. Drew Lanham is an ornithologist, naturalist, essayist, and poet. His research and teaching focus on the impacts of forest management on birds and other wildlife. He brings his knowledge of ecology, as well as his perspective as a Black man living in the South, to his work as a storyteller, poet, and passionate advocate for conservation. He is currently Alumni Distinguished Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Master Teacher in the Forestry and Environmental Conservation Department at Clemson University. He is also Poet Laureate of Edgefield, South Carolina. In an essay that he wrote in the form of a letter to Henry David Thoreau, Drew describes himself as a kindred spirit of Thoreau, a fellow devotee of the wild world and humane good around its edges. In this letter, Drew thanks Thoreau for the movement he unknowingly started in the mid-19th century. That movement is, in Drew's words, a way of thinking and being about the world we live in and how we treat nature and the nature of us. This was not a new philosophy in Thoreau's day, writes Drew, but one pieced together from other traditions native to this continent long before white people invaded it, a movement with deep roots in the old world, and a movement that transcends the separate and makes the equal paramount. A movement, as Drew writes elsewhere, that joins with kindred, wandering, wondering watchers and ecologically enlightened spirits in the mission to keep things whole. That movement is now, Drew says, the center of what he himself lives for. Dr. Lanham spent his childhood being nurtured by a small farm, family, and the wildness of Edgefield, South Carolina, an experience he recounts in his 2016 book, The Home Place, Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature. This memoir received the Reed Environmental Writing Award from the Southern Environmental Law Center, the Southern Book Prize, and was a finalist for the Burroughs Medal. It was recognized as a memoir and scholarly book of the decade by Literary Hub and the Chronicle of Higher Education, respectively, and has been a common read for universities, colleges, and other organizations. Drew is also the author of Sparrow Envy, Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts, and of Joy is the Justice We Give Ourselves. Other work appears in Orion Magazine, Vanity Fair, High Country News, Emergence, Terrain, Places Journal, Literary Hub, Newsweek, Slate, Audubon, Sierra Magazine, and the New York Times, as well as on NPR, StoryCorps, and On Being with Krista Tippett. Drew's 2013 essay from Orion Magazine, 9 Rules for the Black Bird Watcher, went viral in 2020 after Christian Cooper was accosted and reported to the police for bird watching as a black man in Central Park. In this essay, as in much of his writing, Drew shares his own experiences of racial injustice amid his pursuit to study and love the natural world. As an advocate for social justice, Drew distinguishes himself by sharing his lyrical writing most generously through social media, such as Facebook and Instagram, platforms Thoreau somehow missed out on. In the words of former Orion editor Chip Blake, who's also here with us tonight, it's not an exaggeration to say that Drew has done more than any other modern writer to tear down the walls that surrounded the study of natural history. He has worked indefatigably to invite non-white populations into the wild and into the study and appreciation of nature. Just as importantly, he has helped white audiences understand why the inclusion of people of color in the environmental movement is critically important to the future of nature. He also has built a bridge between Black writers and white nature writers, a bridge that simply did not exist in any real way before Drew set out to build it. Dr. Lanham has received awards from, among others, the National Audubon Society, the North American Association for Environmental Education, the Center for Biological Diversity, and the Academy of American Poets. In 2022, he received a MacArthur Foundation Genius Award for creating a new model of conservation that combines conservation science with personal, historical, and cultural narratives of nature. Every era has its crucial spokespersons, and those who remind us of the beauties and fragilities of nature and of where, how, and for what we might live. Tonight we honor one such spokesperson. Thank you, Drew, for your writing, your wisdom, and your way with words that marries wonder with wildness, humility with hope, and justice with joy. Our world needs you among us, and we are so grateful for your extraordinary work and your extraordinary soul. Please join me in congratulating the 2024 recipient of the Thoreau Prize, Dr. Joseph Drew Lanham.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, John. Thank you, Rebecca. Not the best time to be without words, but again, thank you. This is a special time and a special place, and I am honored to be among you. I've been thinking about time a good bit lately, and the urgency of time, because we are in urgent times. But then I think, as a species, maybe we've always been in urgent times. But certainly as a nation, we are in urgent times. And so it is such a great honor to stand before you as a kindred spirit, as someone who tries to understand, not understands, but attempts to understand the interplay between who it is that we are as beings and our place in the natural world. But then how it is that we treat the natural world, but also how we treat each other. And that's a thin, thin place. And Henry David Thoreau certainly recognized that thin place. And so I thought I would share this evening. Of course, my mind changes with these things. But I thought I would share with you a couple of readings, one short, one longer, one new, one older, that perhaps gives you some indication or idea of where not just my head is, but more so my heart, and I hope in some way our hearts are in these spaces. Identity is at the center of almost everything these days. For a birder, it's de rigueur. Profession and passion drive my avicentric life, and I'm an odd mix from the expected. A professor, poet, ornithologist who happens to be black. This means I live at the intersection of words, birds, and an identity that's created issues for America for a few centuries. Enslavement, a civil war, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, and police brutality, to name a few. I use writing as a lever and wild birds or wild nature as a fulcrum to get at the heart of a national conservation ethos that's largely overlooked the connections between saving nature and considering civil rights. Yes, an odd mix, but necessary in my thinking. Like many, I often seek support from mentors and exemplars, folks past and present, who I can turn to bolster the work that I do. By words written and action taken, they are tailwinds, pushing and warm air giving lift to my mission of coloring the conservation conversation. Without too much thought, there are a few people I can count on for guidance. Most are dead. It's a mix of my father, Martin Luther King Jr., Rachel Carson, James Baldwin, Aldo Leopold, Maya Angelou, Walt Whitman, Barack Obama, my grandmother, Mamatha, Frederick Douglass, Langston Hughes, and Henry David Thoreau. Each of these people has some measure of something critical to my nature that I nurture inside myself. Daddy's intellectual work ethic, MLK's peaceful persistence, Rachel's courage, Baldwin's temerity, Barack's poise, Leopold's lyrical moral evolution, Maya's resonant tenor, Whitman's sensual wanderlust, Frederick's obstinate vision, Langston's dedication to the Black American story, and Thoreau's commitment to wildness and to justice. I'm sure there are others worthy of mention, but if pressed, these are the human beings who hold the traits I'd like somehow to absorb. The last person on my list of enviables, Henry David Thoreau, somehow found a way to worship wildness and to see the conditions of injustice as not mutually exclusive, but rather linked as moral imperatives. I first met Thoreau like most kids of my mid-70s, early 80s junior high coming-of-age cohort, in my first English composition classes and the perfunctory surveys of American literature. The transcendentalists were introduced, mostly lumped together. Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman were thrown into the slightly weird, nature-loving poets and writers, all of them snowbound in New England with nothing to do but write about rock walls, ponds, and thrushes. I identified them as people with common interests, even if removed from my own life by more than a region and a century. Something about that commonality across time and race and place appealed to me. Growing up in the midst of wildness on a family farm helped. Farmer, science, teacher, parents didn't hurt. Maybe it was the Leopold Sand County Almanac discovery that had turned me towards sunsets and sunrises that opened the door to Thoreau's ramblings. Maybe it was the love affair with birds that was already deep enough to wish for ivory bills. Maybe it was the imprinting by my mystic grandmother that could have conjured it all together. There was nature and there was nurture that likely left little choice than to cling to a personality who favored walking in woods and around ponds to watch birds over anything else. Even if that person was white and dead. If nature love and concern for the human condition is a part of your identity, then Henry David Thoreau will be too. While not the only dead mentor, not like me in appearance, Henry David's unique abilities to blend cause and impact, a keen reverence for nature, wild and human, stuck with me as more than those with blinders on for birds. Yes, John James Audubon and all those men out exerting manifest destiny for birds impacted me. But I quickly came to know Thoreau as a different kind of watcher, one who didn't need binoculars or a collecting shotgun to appreciate birds. Like him, I prefer the wider field of view to take in full context rather than the high-powered, myopic, feather-filled one. I sometimes wonder if Thoreau would have been a dedicated e-birder or kept a strict life list. Not likely. There's a transcendentalist trope, an easy algorithm of if Henry David Thoreau, then Walden Pond. It follows as Leopold to Shack, Rachel Carson to Maine Coast. Oddly enough, I haven't been able to link any transcendentalists to the foundations of American ornithology. I'm wondering if maybe these were people whose attention was drawn outward in a different way, but also inward, that maybe didn't fit so well with ornithological obsessions. And while Thoreau was a dedicated naturalist and journaler, keeping track of species appearances in their ecology, he seemed less pathologically possessed by it. Full disclosure here. I've got lots of issues with bird lover luminaries whose names I'd rather not insert here, but JJA are the initials. Check my list of enviable people and you'll note a lack of founding father ornithologists and bird enthusiasts. It's not that I don't admire some folks deeply feathered, it's just that in my thinking of my own imperfect form and function, there seems to be a lot of historical birders that have serious issues to face. Issues like supporting enslavement, indigenous genocide, misogyny, and mass extinction by their own hands. Who are the outliers? Rachel, Henry David, Aldo. I've been to Maine, but not had a chance to tide pool hop for purple sandpipers or look from the window over Rachel's writing desk out onto the northern rocky eastern shore with skeins of black scoters stitching sea to sky. I've spent days at the shack and been in conversation with Leopold Legacy for decades. But Walden, up until recently, has escaped me. In July 2022, I did have the fortune to come here to Concord, Massachusetts, and offer a keynote at the annual meeting. This was a whirlwind 3 days for me, but within that short time, I toured a town where I saw more Black Lives Matter flags than actual Black people. I visited a William Brewster exhibition at the Concord Museum and saw the possibilities of collaborating across culture with birds as connective tissue. Brewster hired a Black man, Gilbert, who assisted him in critical ways. The museum exhibition dedicated a tiny corner to him in 2 rooms of exhibit space. I spent time in whispering conversation, too, with Jane Goodall and saw through her eyes a life more at home within shadowed forest canopy and lit by leaf-filtered sun than under fluorescent crowd crush. I witnessed the celebration of a Black American in and out of freedom who laid claim to life as full human being through ownership and steward responsibility for a piece of land now in the Walden Reserve. I came to understand that Labradoodles are the preferred animal companions of upper crust outer Bostonians. The new Brahmin, I suppose. All of this swirled about as I delivered my keynote from a Unitarian church pulpit in praise of a bird watcher unafraid to see beyond birds, to focus on questions of humanity and freedom. I shared an imagined correspondence between contemporaries Henry David and John James, where Henry took Johnny to task for being an enslaver. Based upon the post-message questions and reception, my dead birder letters hit home. I posed the question in the end of who'd make the better bird-watching partner. I chose the man of the time who would see my freedom, my personhood, over listing new species. The whirlwind and word delivered, there was but one loose thread dangling on my wanna-do list, and that was the walk around Walden Pond. And so I will tell you, I took that walk around Walden Pond, but I took that walk around Walden Pond because of one person, but also because of a trip elsewhere. Rochelle Johnson is a professor and a poet and a birder just like me. She just so happens to be a white woman living in Idaho, a state diametrically opposed to my native South Carolina geographically, and also in opposition to my level of comfort. Stepping into ornithological ecology parlance, Idaho has been a do not land zone in my range map model of being. Due to a history of well-known white supremacist homeland claims, it represents suboptimal to marginal habitat for my well-being. The Southern Poverty Law Center's hate maps have consistently shown it to be a state riddled with hate, as many other states across this country unfortunately are. And so I'd resisted landing there for lectures, bird talks, finding chuckers, or any other reason that could be given. It was not a place I identified as a go-to destination. It wasn't positively situated on my habitat suitability indices as a good destination. That was until Rochelle, a flockmate of sorts, promised safety, a good time with engaged students, and a harpy eagle. It took months and lots of mental test flights that included a heart-to-heart with Rochelle about my deep trepidations. She understood and left the decision up to me with minimal pressure exerted beyond a sincere belief that a visit would be beneficial for many in Idaho and for me back in South Carolina. Trust grew and fledged in our truth sharing. I flew west to Boise on that faith. Rochelle kept every promise. Her students were indeed engaged, and I gave my first lecture in a grove of aspen with a nesting Cooper's hawk overhead. Remember that? I took good, direct, no-holds-barred questions about identity and range mapping from the writing students. I ate lunch with a group of African students who made a difference in how I saw a once extra-liminal space. My keynote, sharing thoughts on the convergence between conservation and culture, and my Thoreau to Audubon exchange went well. Rochelle promised a surprise to open my eyes to more than the stories of potato state hate, and took me to the Anne Frank Memorial, and I walked in the unexpected light of tolerance in a place where I believed there was none. We even visited the Black Americans of Idaho Museum, just a block north from the memorial. I was shocked to learn that, yes, we'd even made history in a place I believed we had no space. Rochelle and her partner, Rodney Gold, treated me to the coolest bar, a motel restored to full neon glow, funky bourbon bar where old fashions became our two-day nightcap tradition. That's where it all started. We weren't finished, though. Rochelle, being president of the Thoreau Society, a not-so-serendipitous coincidence that linked Boise to Concord, in an odd southeast to northwest to northeast indirect route, the metaphorical analog of a swallowtail kite, varied thrush, and blackcap chickadee coming together to connect regions and unite, resolve. The invitation to do Massachusetts had been in the bag long before Idaho, but I had not really thought about the linkages until Idaho was in the rear view and Beantown next up. And so that's a little bit of a travelogue about how I came to this space, but after a lifetime almost, all this time, nearly 60 years of thinking about Henry David Thoreau, about thinking about birds, about thinking about my own life, my own range map of where it is that I can be comfortably and where it is that I can't be comfortably, and that one single person can make a difference. That in this span of space, from Boise to Boston to South Carolina, that what one person thinks and feels is an activist's thing. And Henry David knew this. He knew this. He knew that words mattered. He knew that not just talking about walking, but walking the talk made a difference. And so I'm grateful to Rochelle for encouraging me to come west, but then to come east. That day that we spent walking Walden after Jane Goodall left was a little bit of a hurried affair, if you'll remember. It was growing dark, there was a full moon, and I think we had less than 30 minutes before the park was to close. But I think we spent like an hour and a half somehow there. And so I think about that time often, and in learning that I've been fortunate enough to have this award. Again, thinking about the expanse of time and space, thinking about the difference in the time that Henry David Thoreau lived, in the time that I live, that we live, they are not so different. We are once again faced with the uprising of intolerance. Nature being assaulted from every side. Identity being questioned, persecuted. And so these are urgent times. And I think that what Henry David Thoreau offers is an opportunity to reflect, an opportunity for us to understand that the words that we write matter more now than ever. Today, we sauntered on Henry David's advisement, took an early morning walk as blessing for the rest of the day. Chose Robert Frost's road less traveled to Goose Pond to find no geese, but instead spied Wendell's splendid wood drake and Whitman's sensual multitudes, at peace with what many might ignore. The remnants of hardwood royalty, American chestnut that the first people come before would have seen, might have used, still struggled in growth-stunted blight for its place in the sun, a sylvan kindred spirit. Rachel's declaration became apparent, but not given much thought, because we did as she suggested, with our hearts warming in morning chill, pausing often to feel more than think. Simplified 3 times, again, again, and again, is the formula. Binoculars taken down to listen revealed better views of every bird. But then the closer we looked at any one wild thing, the further away the worries of the world seemed. Time stopped. After all, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see, he said. Walden Pond came later, a lovely enough circumnavigation again, but there was Goose Pond to remember. This is not to say that the church or temple or synagogue or circle or pond you might choose is worse or better, but that sometimes the other place delivers a different message that needs to be heard. It might whisper to you. On the pinioning of duck's wings, more than profess it by greater width or breadth. This is to say, we found Goose Pond, that lily-covered water on the other side of the road, showing itself to be no less beautiful, no less worthy of worship, no less divine a spot on the map by lesser worn path taken to see it than Walden on the other side. I did wonder if Cato Ingraham would have approved of the venture. Finding no black walnuts to devour, we consumed light, slanting through pines and oaks, titmice roving through thickets, and few other humans on a lesser-known path. You see, solitude is sometimes the best food for the soul. I take it as activism, the choice to do the counter thing, for following the path everyone else does can only wear the rut of convention deeper still. War rages, bombs fall, children die, a tyrant asks for your vote to remove choice from us all. Many Neros fiddle, and the earth by climate change burns. If change is to come among us, a better world for human and for wild beast, then seeking what might lie outside of expectation is both the protest for different and the prayer for peace unsealed. I am forever grateful to you for your hearts, for your minds, for the space here, for remembering Henry David Thoreau with this award, with this legacy, but more by your actions, by being a place to feel safe walking down the street. May it always be so. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I love questions. Absolutely.
If you have questions.
I promise 100% response. It might be an eyebrow raised or a shrug, but that's a response. Yes.
Could you share a few ideas about what you do when despair seems possible? Despair enters in. Sorry to start that way, but
No.
your talk was hugely uplifting, and there was another side to the talk, coming away from despair.
Well, it's hard, right? These are hard times. And so again, as a scientist, I'm sort of constantly in pre and post treatment mode. and we have to figure out, we are the experimental units in one respect, and what are we being treated with? Now, we can be treated on a large scale from those above us in all sorts of ways. So institutionally, I'm speaking. We can be treated in all sorts of ways that can make us feel a certain kind of way, that can make us feel as if justice is never on our side, that can make us feel unsafe. And so in those, I don't place much faith in institutions. It is a person-to-person guerrilla love affair. It's the only way. And as fear and angst rule many of us these days, and wondering what's going to happen on certain days or dates, I have to turn to those who treat me in the ways of respect and love. So, that's the safety net. Now, the other part of that for me is essential is nature. My grandmother used to sing a song that you may have heard, but it said that this joy I have, the world didn't give it, the world didn't take it away. How many of you have ever heard that? It's that song that I grew up with. I can tell you, I did not like sitting in those pews as a child, but I can remember the songs that were sung, and they stayed with me. And so joy is something that in those wood ducks this morning, or in the way the light was falling through the forest, or in just finding that space, in that sort of timeless moment, there was joy that no one absolutely can take from me. And so in those moments of despair, that's where I find it. Where I find it, I'll tell you that as the 9 were killed at Mother Emanuel all those years ago, what do you do? Here we go again. But this time, there's this virulence, this plan to eliminate people because of the color of their skin. So what did I do? I eventually got up and I went out to the spot where I tend to watch birds, and there's this sunflower field, and the sunflowers weren't yet in full bloom, but there was one sunflower, and if you know anything about agriculture now, everything, of course, is, they're essentially clones, and so GMOs, and so everything is the same height, except there was this one sunflower that was taller than the rest, and instead of just one perfectly round, big bloom, there were many smaller blooms. And this indigo bunting was choosing to sing from that different flower. And in that moment of that beautiful bird on that beautiful flower, I lost it. So the bitter and the sweet, I think, are the savory of life. And so in those ways, I have to find those spaces. One of Kathleen's students asked me yesterday about what do you do beyond writing to activate, to be an activist, and I responded. I said, well, writing is activism. History and times before it are littered with those who dared write, but did not live beyond their words, but their words lived beyond them. So all of those are things in despairing times that I have to hold on to. It's not that I don't despair, but I have to find some way to repair beyond it or in the midst of it. If I don't, then those who manufacture that despair have me, and I will not be enslaved again.
Thank you for such a thoughtful and thought-provoking talk. There was something that you said that really stayed with me, which is the closer we look at something, sometimes the farther the worries of the world seem. And for me, looking at Thoreau's work, something that I find the most just moving about it is how closely he looks and honors the quotidian. And so I've always thought of that as kind of an ethical act, like paying attention to something that other people don't notice or that we don't normally notice. But when you were talking about looking closely and then having the worries fall away, which can be nice but also maybe dangerous, I was just curious to get your thoughts on, do you think that there's another side of that, if looking really closely could not be, that there's a way of ignoring something, or, you were talking about, I think, Audubon, looking really closely and identifying species of birds and then not acknowledging the personhood of people in, his own species.
Sure. So,
I was just curious about that.
Yeah, you'll hear me say, take the binoculars down, and I to the horror of many of my birder friends, I'll say, lose the binoculars for a while, right? Like, what? How? How am I going to ever identify a confusing fall warbler again if I can't look at it closely? But I can watch behavior. I can look at other things that give me clues as to who that bird is, and so that individual, and so looking close in that way, I think, is good. When it becomes dangerous is sort of in that place of, I think, of obsession, where looking close becomes the same as exclusion, that you don't recognize what's outside of your field of view. And so that's looking through your binoculars so closely at that confusing fall warbler that you don't recognize that you're also in an impoverished place where people maybe, and I use the example of swallowtail kites in a place called Allendale, South Carolina. And swallowtail kites are bird gods. Anyone who ever sees one wonders how such a thing could evolve, right? It just sort of fell out of heaven, and there it is. And but one of the best places to see them is third world USA. And so being aware that when you go to a space that the value of your high-end binocs and your spotting scope and your long lens camera is more than most people there make in a year. But you're only birding, right? So that's what, now, I can take that another step and I can say, when I decide just to look within my own enclave and exclude everybody else, and then I begin to see my own enclave as being better than others. You see where I'm going with that? That if I don't think exactly like you or look exactly like you or do as you say, then I get excluded. So the cool thing about binoculars, You know, one of the first things that you teach kids with their first set of binoculars, yeah, it brings things really close, but then you flip them upside down and it becomes a microscope. You guys have all done that, right? Okay. So to understand that that same tool can be used for two very different things. The widest field of view is here. I don't have to see extraordinarily close up to understand the context in which some being lives. And that being then takes on a different context itself inside me once I understand the context outside of it. So it's you know, I love seeing rictal bristles on flycatchers as much as anybody else. But then to take that down, to take those binoculars down and sort of get the larger view, I think is important. So zooming in and out, I think, is what we do. Does that make sense? You're welcome.
So maybe fortunately, nobody named a bird after Thoreau, so we don't have to worry about this problem immediately. But I'm just wondering, I know you've spoken on this issue in the past, but it was a while ago, and I'd love to hear it afresh. So of course, I'm live now north of Seattle, and the Seattle Audubon Society recently eliminated JJA's name from the organization, and the Audubon Society I belong to, we have this debate going on, and meanwhile, we're all joking about having to buy new bird books every few years because all the names of people are being removed from birds. And I have, as a historian, kind of complex reaction to this. So it won't be Stellar Jay, it'll be, I don't know, Pacific Jay maybe, and it can't be Townsend's Warbler and Brewer's Blackbird and so on. I'm just wondering, this kind of renaming to eliminate the kind of heritage that we do inherit by virtue of being who we are in this world. What your thoughts are on how we can both deal intelligently with it, but also teach and relate to people who come to us, especially young people, in the midst of this sort of a wave of renaming, rethinking, expunging, eliminating, not talking about like the past.
Great question, thank you. How much time you guys got? There's the, well, for one, I think, I talk about monuments. I talk about flesh and bone monuments, and that's what birds sort of are to me. And I try to teach people about identifying with birds as much as identifying birds. And so Rochelle mentioned sort of things that I post on social media the other day, a few days ago. There was a flight of Swainson's thrushes that came through. Beautiful, buffy spectacle, sort of buffy throat. Used to be called, they were one of the olive-backed thrushes. Anybody remember those field guides? But they're Swainson's thrushes. And, I was thinking, as I was looking at these birds, I said, I'm trying to see the Swainsons on that thrush. It's so Swainson-y. It's just, can't you see there, right above the eye, there's that Swainson that we can identify. And so it was a little bit of a obviously tongue-in-cheek, but then people asked, they said, well, what would you call it? I said, oh my God. And then people just started filtering in these names. There's tawny-throated thrush, there's buffy spectacled thrush. There are all these names that help describe this bird and don't burden it with a human weight. And so it's a being worthy of its own identity. And so, to your question of the history, I'm all about, so these monuments that I talk about, any monument that comes down, the monument can come down, but the mindset can remain. And so even as monuments come down, people's hearts and minds aren't changing. They're just going inside and building monuments somewhere else. So I like to talk, one of the reasons I talk about Audubon so much is that part of what I realized, I was making assumptions about bird watchers for lots of years. And part of what I became to realize is that bird watchers are just a subset of society, right? They don't all think like me. I don't think like all of them. And so in this way, when I talk about Audubon, I think it's important to know who the people are that we've elevated as gods. I want to know all the presidents that enslaved people. I want to know who they were. Does that mean I'm going to take, all the Washingtons out of my billfold and burn them? No. But what it does mean is that I have some sense of who these people were. So, I tell people to look at ichthyologists, look at fish people, look at the beautiful names especially of small stream fishes, turquoise darter, right? Tessellated darter. All of these names that are just beautiful. And birds deserve more than being a Swainson's, or being a Townsend's, or being a Clark's. Because initially I was like, you know what? I want York to have some respect, so I want that to be York's crow. Well, I don't know anything about York. I know York was an enslaved man who was forced to go west and practice manifest destiny and then denied the promise of liberty when he got back. I know that, Sacagawea has sort of been mythologized, and people have sort of put her in this place of being the good Indian who helped white people conquer the West. So I said, well, let's have York's crow and let's have Sacagawea's woodpecker instead of Lewis's woodpecker. Well, that's still weighting birds with human identities. And I think that these beings deserve their own identities. Now, it's sort of fun to go through your old field guides and call birds what you want to call them. Now, I will tell you that the AOS does not have a police force out there that's going to come at you if you mark up your old field guides. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to go and use bookstores and find old field guides. But I will tell you that I can go in my first edition of Sprun and Chamberlain, Birds of South Carolina, double-crested cormorant, and the colloquial name is still there. And it's a name that Roger Torrey Peterson used early on. Nigger goose, because it's a black, useless bird that fools hunters into shooting at it. So we don't need to think about names of birds. Old squaw, long-tailed duck. And I'm going to say it here, Audubon got that right. What did Audubon call those birds? Long-tailed duck. So I think it just bears us talking about it, to understand who people were, to understand why the history is worth revisiting and not having, when I thought about that bird as a tawny-throated thrush, it's a little bit of much in the alliteration, right? But buffy spectacled thrush. That I couldn't find a bit of Swainson's in it. And that to be able to free it in a way. And so I think these discussions will continue. I think the honorific that I would give really to someone who discovered a bird or a beetle or something, I would say, what's the name that you can come up with for this that describes this being in a way that would help us know it, not your name. And that's an honorific to be able to say, oh, wow, yeah, so let's see, that was on the eastern side but what I noticed about this bird, and then so many of our birds, the names are also of the dead birds that were in hand, red-bellied woodpecker, right? I mean, most people, you don't see the red belly on that woodpecker unless it's in hand. So in thinking about names and thinking about, and it's really thinking about identities, I think. And of course, everything now is going to be politicized, but I would just ask people to think about, as these names change, as they're unburdened. And really, the fair thing for me is to just go ahead and the AOS say, you know what, we're not even going to get into the discussion at this point as the scientific organization of vetting people. They're going to have different names. Now, you can still call it a Swainson's thrush if you want, but then that bird, as far as sort of who the governing authorities agree on, it's tawny-throated thrush or buffy spectacled thrush or some name that helps us know who that bird is. Because now, I mean, what's the question? If I tell somebody, oh, that's a Swainson's thrush, then the question becomes, well, who is Swainson? Then you're off the bird. You're off the bird and onto some human being. And you're onto, so that's how I see it. And I want it to be about the bird, and I want it to be about the people who can help the bird and have more of those birds. So it's going to be a sticky situation, I know, but I think, again, I know we can learn from others, ichthyologists, entomologists, who seem to have had less of a problem naming things by appearance or behavior or habitat than ornithologists have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think it's also time for questions right now. Drew will be available to sign copies of books in our lovely antechamber room there. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for some wonderful words.
Thank you.